Bonsoir à tous. Sorry. Yes. Et là, oui, très bien. Bonsoir à tous, good evening. Sorry for being late. I was trying to edit my speech made through AI, and it was not working. So I had to rely on Vincent Florent to finish the speech. Thank you very much for being here with us. My name is Mohamed Bouabdallah. I am the Cultural Counselor of France in the US and the director of Villa Albertine. It is our privilege to welcome you tonight, and I'm so happy to see so many of you with us tonight. So welcome to Art in the Age of AI, the Villa Albertine's two-day exploration into the transformational impact of artificial intelligence on artistic creation. In a minute, I'll share more details about the exciting program and the incredible speakers we have today. But first, let me address maybe a question you have on your mind, and maybe you ask ChatGPT or another AI software, why a conference here in Villa Albertine? Why now? Why here? Why France? So why now? I mean, we believe, and I'm sure you do believe the same, that's why you are here with us tonight, that AI is not simply a tool of the future, it's already shaping right now the present, and especially in the field of arts and creativity. And in a moment, you'll hear from two artists, one French, one American, who will share their insight on this new reality. Minne Atairu, an American artist using AI to question crucial topics like representation, and also French artist Simon Bouisson, a 2022 Villa Albertine resident, whose work explores AI as a tool in filmmaking. Why here? It shouldn't come as a surprise that we talk about innovation in this house of arts, like Villa Albertine. Indeed, art and innovation have an intertwined and fascinating history, as technological innovation often invites artists, creators, for new eras of creativity, of invention. One example, and we have many examples. The metal paint tubes were first invented by American oil painter John Goff Rand as a way of transporting paints for outdoor use. And Jean Renoir, the famous filmmaker and son of the impressionist painter Pierre-Auguste Renoir, quoted his father as saying, "Without paints in tubes, there would have been no Cézanne, no Monet, no Sisley, no Pissarro, nothing of what we call today Impressionism." And just one parenthesis, I invite you to go to Paris to visit the wonderful exhibition Impressionisme 1874 in Musée d'Orsay. And if you don't travel to France, it will be shown in Washington in September. Why France? Our nation, and of course in the US, what is the legitimacy of France to speak about AI? The US is ahead. But let me demonstrate that you are in the right place. Our nation has cultivated talents such as Turing Award laureate and Meta's chief AI scientist Yann Lequin. It has nurtured innovative enterprises like Mistral AI, which is considered as one of the main actors in the field of AI. Google's AI center in Paris, for example, employs over 300 researchers and engineers. In fact, if you didn't know that, but Paris today is ranked third in the world for AI investment after San Francisco and New York. Wow. Yes, you can applaud. So, now you know why you are here. What are we going to discuss? So beyond the relationship between AI and artistic creation, our discussions will consider the reasons why this technology has become such a fascinating, inspiring, and let's face it, sometimes worrying topic. And last week, during the jury of Villa Albertine residence for 2025, I had a very fascinating discussion with Glenn Lowry, the president of MoMA, the director of MoMA, about does AI does good for creation, artistic creation, etc. And it's a really fascinating topic. So our program during these 2 days will acknowledge the broader implications of this technology. The Writer Guild of America authors and SAG-AFTRA actors who participated in the strikes in Hollywood were among the first to highlight the consequences of AI on artistic careers and intellectual property, and they will be discussing with us. And in a year, we will, during this year, we will have major elections in Europe, in France, in the US, and we also need to tackle the impact of AI on democracy. And several weeks ago here, we had a very wonderful discussion with Le Monde in English about the impact of AI on journalism and democracy. So this is a perspective we would like to offer for the next 2 days. We are neither supporters of AI doomerism, nor are we techno-naive. We would like to cultivate a sense of awareness, intelligent thinking, with debate, with respect, so that we can embrace AI as a new brush in the artist's hand that could maybe, hopefully, well start a nouvelle vague of creativity. And at the same time, we do hope that we will find the tools to protect intellectual property and artists' liberties. So I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to the experts and the speakers that will be joining us for these 2 days. Thanks so much. We are honored to host you, representative of American and French artist communities, tech companies, museums, universities, even, and coming also from France. And finally, I would like to thank the whole team at Villa Albertine who organized this event, Vincent Florent and all his team, and our partner SACD for their support. I would like also to thank the many bright minds who allowed us to pick their brains for ideas and building the program, including Clémence Weber, Jean-Hugues Monnier, and David Jones. So thank you very much, and I'm giving now the floor to Vincent Florent, Director of Film, TV, New Media, AI, etc. at Villa Albertine, to kick off the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohamed. We have indeed a very rich program today as we will speak about AI as a tool for creation, representation, artists and museum. Our first panel will question tools and representation. Mohamed described the menu with Minne Atairu and filmmaker Simon Bouisson, moderated by Kyle Chayka, author and journalist from The New Yorker. Then Chad Nelson, OpenAI's creative specialist, will be demonstrating OpenAI's tools for creation in his keynote about where is AI going. Finally, we'll talk about AI in museums and cultural institutions with Jane Alexander from the Cleveland Museum of Art, Freya Salway from Google Arts and Culture, and Thomas Sagory from the French Museum of Archaeology. This will be moderated by Zachary from the New York Times. But first, I'm very happy to welcome, and thanks for his contribution on the event, tech and culture event expert Laurent Gaveau, who will frame today's panels with Keynote, Year Zero for Artificial Intelligence. Laurent.
Could I have the clicker? Thank you. Thank you, and hello everybody. So my name is Laurent Gaveau, and I'm of course very honored to be invited to give this introduction, which I promised will be short. It's a little bit of a challenge and a stress for me. Okay. Of course. You don't think that works? Ah, it works. Thank you. Starting again. Hello everybody. Very happy and honored to be here to give a very short introduction about the topics of the day. It's a little bit of a challenge because I've been asked in 10 to 15 minutes to provide you with a brief history of the technology of AI and also all the moments where it was intersections with the arts and culture world. So in 10 minutes it will be difficult, but like many of you, I'm sure, I think that artistic expressions are central in the understanding of many tech revolutions, and especially this one. So let's try. An important caveat is that it will be obviously an oversimplified timeline. in 10 minutes, and more of a personal collection of stuff that I found interesting in my own journey at the crossroad of art and technology. Let's just considering as starting points for the conversations today. Speaking of starting points, let's begin perhaps with the launch or the birth or the revelation to the world or the nativity maybe of ChatGPT in November 2022, a moment that is probably a defining one for us all. And let's try to frame it around the concept of a year zero, the potential year zero of artificial intelligence. You probably know that in the Gregorian calendar, the year zero does not exist. Its narratives are confined to the Bible and later representation of what this year zero was. Here it's me. Here it's a very beautiful depiction of Nativity by Fra Angelico. And you might know that the artist was a strong believer, and the way he depicts this nativity is obviously one of a man who thinks this is the beginning of all hopes. But on the other hand of the spectrum of understanding the year zero from an artistic standpoint, we have Roberto Rossellini's masterpiece, Germany Year Zero. Yes, of course. Germany Year Zero, shot in the ruins of Berlin in 1948, depicting a world on the verge of apocalypse through the tragic and very sad destiny of a child who commits murder and then suicide. Basically, a terrible story and a grim tale for the years to come. And I think since November 2022 and the year zero of artificial intelligence and the birth of ChatGPT, we are a little bit in between those two poles, optimism or the fear of a new apocalypse. I was wondering maybe the technology itself could give us some clues to solve the enigma. I think for the past 2 years, something that was interesting was to start interpreting images created and generated by machine learning. You might know that, I'm sure you know that those images are based on statistics and probability. So in a way, maybe the way those images are created could encompass some sort of a view of how we feel today about a topic. Especially in the case of a very weak prompt, like this one. Ask to ChatGPT or DALL-E. Generate an image called ChatGPT Nativity inspired by the old masters. And this is the result. So it is a quite striking image on many levels. Obviously, if this is some sort of zeitgeist of the time and the probability of how we collectively feel about what we are experiencing, it's a little bit frightening. On the other hand, you might also notice, maybe you're not close enough, but you might also notice something quite gentle in the glow of the light and the pose of the wise men and wise women who are witnessing this with this sensibility. So it might also be some sort of a way to maybe materialize a new gentle way for machine and human collaboration. But however interpreted, we must realize that this is a technical feat, like few we could experience in our life. When you think that this is produced by a machine based on statistics and sparse data on a non-existent scenario previously, it's quite miraculous. So I think the question here is, how did we get there? How did we get to this moment in time where this is possible from a technical standpoint? We could go back to the ancient myths of antiquity to discuss hubris and what man can do. But maybe for the sake of time, we will go back just in the middle of last century with the first age of artificial intelligence, which we would call the pioneers. Let's continue then to follow this history. The key moment, I think, would be 56, the conference of Dartmouth, where the AI was first considered a field and was defined. Artificial intelligence, so that we are all aligned on the definition, is considered a machine's ability to perform soft cognitive functions that we usually associate with human minds. The period of the pioneers is fascinating on multiple levels. It's kind of a Promethean moment, or very revolutionary, where AI concepts such as machine learning, neural networks are already in place as early as the 50s and the 60s. And the research is going at full speed. What is also interesting in this period is that in those very early historical pioneering labs in the world, there are some attempts or some discussion around artificial intelligence and creativity, artificial intelligence and the arts. I always thought it was quite fascinating, for example, to realize that as early as 1950, Alan Turing, in his lab in Manchester and with his legendary massive computer called Baby, was creating some program that would generate love letters, or some other program that would generate some music. We are talking about a moment 60 to 70 years ago where machines were already generating some art and were, in a way, creative. Later on, those early experiments would be consolidated into new practices at the intersection of art and computing. Here I choose just one example, but a very seminal one. It's an artwork by Michael Knoll from the Bell Labs in '64. It is called Computer Composition with Lines. So Knoll was an engineer at the Bell Lab, a very pioneering place for digital art. What I think super interesting in this artwork is that the computer algorithm that he created is supposed to generate visual patterns resembling Pete Mondrian's own patterns and style and composition. So I think the key thing to remember here from those heroic days is that more than 60 years ago, computers were already able or trying to mimic human artistic styles, and they were also already envisioned as potential tools to help artists materialize their visions. I will go super fast because I realize I'm already late, but I will go super fast on the next phase, which is though a fascinating one, which is called expert system. It's more or less the 60s. It's when the system is meant to mimic the knowledge of a very specific knowledge from the human field. What is interesting in this moment, from a research standpoint, is that there is a pause, and not many of us know that, but there is a moment, 2 decades actually, that are called the AI winter, a moment where AI was branded or labeled as overhyped and even not fulfilling their promises. And for 2 decades, the funding was stopping, basically. The research was progressing as much as they could, and it was super interesting, but the funding was out. It's also the moment where, while the research was on pause, the general public, all of us, were exposed to what artificial intelligence could be in completely new ways and at scale. That's especially the golden age of science fiction, where writers and artists would create non-human intelligences which are still defining the way we think about robots. I've chosen obviously the most iconic one, HAL 9000 from Stanley Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey. He is ranked as, I think, the 13th greatest villain in film history. Because, as you might remember, he's supposed to protect both the crew and the mission of the spaceship, but he will kill the crew to protect the mission, which is a case of, in engineering, what we would call bad programming. But what I think is super interesting with this personification of an artificial intelligence by an artist is that it is based on a valid, in many ways, and quite sophisticated interpretation of the theories and speculations of key and reputable researchers of the time. In the case of HAL 9000, it was Minskin, which was a legendary researcher at the MIT, who was an advisor on the set. And when you look at the film again today, which I advise you to do, you will discover that in many ways, the conflict in his programming, crew versus mission, the way he acquires an undefined type of autonomy, the key questions around consciousness, artificial and human intelligence are already there in ways that are extremely pertinent for understanding the AI revolution today. And especially his death, or his shutdown, death, when he seems to unlearn and regress as a program and go back to some sort of embryonic stage, is, in my opinion, key to understand exactly, or not to understand, but to visualize what is machine learning, which invites me to make a pause on this concept of machine learning, because everything we've been discussed so far was not machine learning. It was artificial intelligence, but it was called symbolic or expert system. Very interesting field. Machine learning is another field of artificial intelligence, which is really at the heart of the revolution we are experiencing today. To simplify, it's a paradigm that empowers machines to learn patterns and make decisions without explicit programming. And the concept is not new, but it took off, to simplify, oversimplify, it took off with the internet. And the end of the AI winter is the beginning of the internet. Why? Because it's the moment where the fuel that was necessary to make the tech operational and useful was suddenly abundant, and this fuel is data. Internet allowed all of us to create the data, and this data is what allowed machine learning to take off, to summarize. And then I will go even faster to 2010, deep learning, which is just a word that we all hear, but which is just a subversion of machine learning, just goes faster by mimicking neural networks and the human brain. And from then, with research being funded, with data being abundant and never-ending, the technology, let's say, goes from one triumph to another, until large language models and generative AI, which we will discuss in my introduction tomorrow. Because right now I want to make a last stop on the art sector. I've chosen two artworks to kind of symbolize where we are right now in terms of understanding the AI revolution and the art. The one is very famous. It's Refik Anadol, Machine Hallucination from 2019. It's very interesting because in a way it's a simple illustration of the tech. It's utilizing machine learning algorithm on vast data collections to create immersive digital installations. And Anadol works actually visualize how AI interprets our world through data. So it's a way to understand the technology, a little bit like what Kubrick was doing with the death of Al. The other artwork that I have chosen is just a still image of a wonderful installation by a German artist, Ito Steriel. It's called not socialism, but social sim. And I want to end on what seems to be an expectation that we have as citizens for artists today, is to not only use the tool but question it. It's been something that they have been doing in the whole history of technology, and many of them are obviously today questioning the technology, its power, its responsibilities, and for example, privacy, surveillance, and the very important subject of bias in the data that is a crucial one. To not conclude, as we have seen through example from the past and this quick journey in tech history, the question of our year zero in artificial intelligence are not new at all. They are just exploding, and it's important to discuss them today. Well, those questions, to summarize, this is a new hope for humanity or an existential risk. Is artificial intelligence and technology at large a set of tools for artists, and for that matter anyone, to materialize their vision and become better artists and greater creators? One step further, do we witness a new form of symbiosis between machine and human in order to explore new creative avenues? And finally, and very importantly, it's probably for all of us to expect from artists, art institutions, to continue to not only criticize in the best sense of the word, but the tech, but to reveal it, to expose it, to do so not only to adjust to the technology, but hopefully to shape it for the best. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurent. We're going to move on to the next panel. We are really happy to be joined by Minne Atairu, Simon Bouisson, and Kyle Chayka for the panel on tools and representation.
Hello. My name is Kyle Chayka. I'm a staff writer at The New Yorker, where I write about the internet. And I recently wrote a book called Filter World, How Algorithms Flattened Culture, which is a bit about machine learning, though not so much generative AI. But as I've written a lot about the internet and just watched people encounter digital technology lately, AI has been like the new thing. It's what everyone's talking about. It's what we're all kind of confronting right now. And I feel like there are two concerns, or like two directions that our thoughts go in. One is the Industrial Revolution thought of the woodworker or the craftsman looking at an automatic saw and feeling threatened, like this thing is going to replace me. And then the other direction, I think, feels a bit like the introduction of photography, over the last 200 years. And I keep thinking back to Walter Benjamin's essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, where he just thinks through how photography changed the work of art and changed how we consume images and make images, but it didn't kill the image. It didn't kill creativity. It didn't kill artistry. And I think what's really interesting with both of your work now is that you are both thinking through how to encounter these tools and use them and incorporate AI into a creative practice without feeling existentially challenged by it, or at least so challenged that you would avoid using it. So I'm very happy to introduce these two artists who are both using AI in different ways. Minne Atairu, over here, is an interdisciplinary artist whose research-driven work explores the complexities of blackness as it unfolds within generative AI systems. Minne has exhibited and performed at the Shed, Frieze, the Harvard Art Museums, the Mark Museum, SOAS Brunei Gallery at the University of London, Microscope Gallery, and the Fleming Museum of Art. And Simon Bouisson is a writer, filmmaker, and a La Famille Film School graduate. I don't speak French, I'm sorry. He has directed digital and new media projects, Jour de Vote, Tokyo Reverse, De Zoom, and has produced two interactive fiction works, Way or Die and République. Additionally, he has directed the television series 3615 Monique for OCS and Stock for FTV. He is currently working on two feature-length films, which I think he'll talk about within this discussion. But I was hoping they're both going to show a little bit of work, and I think we'll start with Minne, if you want to.
Okay, so the work I've chosen to show today is inspired by the Black Madonna, which we'll be talking about shortly. But this is just part of the prompt that I used to generate the work. The Virgin Mary is a Black woman. So here is an image from a recent series that I titled The Virgin and Child, which is sort of this generic reference to images of the Virgin Mary for folks who are familiar with the Christian faith. The Virgin Mary is mother to Jesus, and then Jesus is considered the savior of the world according to biblical history. But in this version, I was thinking of the Virgin Mary as a Black woman, right? I live in Harlem, so I was thinking of the Virgin Mary as a Black woman who is from Harlem. And if she was from Harlem, what would she look like? And this was particularly in conversation with debates about the Black Madonna. We'll talk about it again, which are these black and brown versions of the Virgin and Child that you would find if you did a quick Google search of the Virgin Mary. You'd find that on Google. They are light-skinned, they are fair-skinned, blue-eyed, And however, we have these medieval versions of the Madonna that have very dark skin, but for centuries there have been debates about their skin color. Why would a European artist, for example, depict a Madonna of African descent, right? That's one question I was thinking about in terms of this work. So here again is another image of the Black Madonna, the Virgin and Child, if she was in Harlem, if the baby Jesus wasn't born somewhere else but was born in Harlem. I don't know if you all have been to Harlem, but 125th Street is a really popular street in Harlem, and the Metro North is also very close to 125th Street. So imagine if Jesus was born just under that bridge on 125th Street, right? What kind of gifts would the baby Jesus receive from folks who live in Harlem? It may not be what you've read in the Bible, of course. Like, Harlem has a different energy and a different vibe. It's a very like Black geography. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's great to see the actual images. And I wanted to start out by asking, when did you first and where did you first encounter that figure of the Black Madonna in art history?
I mean, I grew up in Nigeria, and in Nigeria, there are so many religions that may not be like Christianity or Islam, which are the most popular religions, but our indigenous religions sometimes are a fusion of Christianity and the indigenous religions. So growing up, I would see these images of the Black Virgin Mary on altars. However, I never made the connection to the medieval era. My sense at that time is, well, my mom is Catholic, right? So I grew up in the Catholic church. And so my connection at the time, I assumed that the Virgin Mary was localized for that reason. And her Blackness was sort of diabolical in nature, which just tells you so much about colonialism and the way in which Christianity and colonialism are so intermixed. But not until recently, I was reading a document and came across the Black Madonna. I started reading that the images date back to the medieval era. Right, so these are images, there are over 400 images or depictions of the Black Madonna that exist as sculptures and paintings, and they're spread across Europe and not necessarily on the African continent. And they're called Black, obviously, because of their complexion. But we also have like a category of Black Madonnas that have been lightened or whitened or bleached over time during conservation, which is very purposeful, right, to distance them from that sense of Blackness. But they're also, those categories, they also fall into depictions of the Black Madonna.
So this is not just something that you saw as a child and thought was maybe not quite a mistake, but a reinterpretation.
Right.
But then when you encounter it in art history, it kind of feels like, oh, this belonged here the whole time.
Yeah.
Like this was hidden, maybe.
Right.
And how did you feel when you realized it was an actual historical thing? Like, there's 500 years of history of this image or more.
I mean, I think the most important question for me, and it's why I continue to explore the Black Madonna, is for centuries there have been debates about her complexion, right? So, as I mentioned earlier, why would an artist who lived in France depict a Black Madonna who has like blue-black or plum-black skin? And there were always rationalizations for why the skin was depicted as Black, right? So, if you've been to a Catholic church, we use a lot of incense and candles. And so one of the justifications has been that, centuries of exposure to incense and candles made those Black Madonnas Black. And so there's this distancing and rationalizing the fact that they could not, embody Blackness, that they were not racially Black. But sometimes the justification was that it was a miracle. Like, overnight, Black Madonna, she was once white, but now she's Black. Yeah. Like,
it couldn't have been intentional. It couldn't have been a creative act. So in this case, like, these images are restorations or like recreations of that originality. And I wanted to ask, you use a software called Midjourney, which is an AI image generation tool. So you type in some text and then you hit enter, and eventually the tool will give you back an image. And I'm curious, how do you go about first developing a prompt? Like, you showed the very simple prompt, but prompts can be really, really complex.
Yeah, I mean, I don't usually disclose my prompt. But I think for me, because my work centers Black people, Black geographies, I'm very interested in questions of Blackness and algorithms and how that sometimes societal assumptions are encoded within systems. And so a central part of my prompt is always the Black person. So for example, in this prompt, we have the Virgin Mary is a Black woman holding the baby Jesus, and then I always include a lot of modifiers. But one thing I find in that process, because it takes me months to develop my prompt, obviously English is not my first language, so there is that aspect of writing prompts and speaking the English language, right? But in terms of generating Black figures, there are also assumptions encoded in certain things, like I find with color, right? Some associations between color and maybe like a ratchet. If you don't know what a ratchet Black woman is, it's like a Black woman, the stereotypical depiction of a Black woman in the ghetto who's just like always angry, and she has hair like me, and she's just like very loud. And so there are these associations between bright colors, like I find especially with lime green. I don't use that a lot in my work because it does affect the mood of the figure in the portrait. And then depictions that are always outdoors, I find that they all often look indigenous African, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But if I'm interested in generating a Black woman who lives in Harlem, then she's probably not, in the Kalahari Desert. She should look like she's in New York City.
Yeah, there's so much to go into, but on one level, I think there's a misconception that when an artist uses an AI tool, it's like an immediate process. Like, it's one step, you just tell it what to do, and then it does it. But actually, there's so much work and repetition and refinement in this whole thing.
Right, the process of critiquing the work and then refining your modifiers and qualifiers.
Yeah, you become an editor, an art director, a shaper of this text that then generates the work. It's not just like one thing and then you hit the button.
I mean, technically, yeah, you could generate an image in 5 minutes, but you could spend also 3 months doing it. So you would choose your battle.
This isn't a new problem in art history either. Like, people critiqued minimalist artists because they just made a metal box, and that was, seen as unartistic or something. So I don't think this is like a new debate or one that we haven't gotten over already. And to speak to those archetypes that you reference, like an outside scene immediately going back to an indigenous imagery, that's part of the problem of data sets in an AI imagery tool. Like, the data that you put in shapes what you get out of these systems, and they're built on archetypes. And I was wondering how you deal with those. Like, do you have to resist the archetypes that come up? Do you end up using them, like incorporating what they do in the future?
Yes and no. Sometimes I incorporate them. For example, I want to say that in this work, The Virgin and Child, it's almost like playing on the stereotype of Black people, right, in Harlem. We're always like very elaborately dressed, wearing lots of chains, and so you can see that on the Madonna. And so sometimes I weave it into my work, and there are times where I just choose to forget it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with this, you can draw on some of those archetypes and use what brings up that imagery, like the bling chain, which is, it becomes almost Baroque looking in this image as well. Like, you can see some Velázquez, you can see an art history as well as contemporary references. And as you work through these prompts, what does the process feel like to you? Do you feel like this is more of a tool? Do you feel like it's more of a collaborator? Is there a presence that you're working with the AI?
I feel like it's more of a tool, and I hesitate. I mean, in the past, I would say it's a collaborator, but as I've gotten to use it and just like wield it in my own way, I feel it's less of a collaborator, partly because, when I work with human collaborators, they usually augment my process or support me. But I find that with AI, there is the challenge again of representation, right? And those are things that I feel it's psychologically tasking for an artist of color, going through that process again and again. But also, there's the reality that if I'm subscribing for Midjourney, I'm probably paying more than a non-Black artist because of the time I have to spend fixing, not necessarily fixing, but trying to bypass Joe's stereotypical depictions.
So you might find there's like more resistance for what you're trying to do than what someone else might be trying to do if you're trying to get maybe imagery that there's more data on, like art history that's maybe more standardized in a Western canon.
Yeah.
And I mean, just in thinking about your work, it struck me that art history itself is a giant trove of images that humanity has created. And when you look through an art history books, it feels a bit like a data set, like just image after image and date after date. And in some of your work, you've fed data image sets of art historical images into these tools. So I was wondering if you could introduce your project around the Benin bronzes and how you kind of used AI to restore them or adapt them again.
I'm just gonna scroll to the last slide. So this is from my project that's related to the Benin bronzes, and for folks who are not too familiar, the Benin bronzes are this collection of looted objects from Nigeria. They were stolen from Nigeria during the colonial era in 1897. Over 4,000 of them were stolen. So I was very interested in what happened to the artistic landscape in Benin Kingdom after the theft, right, for two reasons. Prior to colonialism in Benin, the artistic landscape was a very well-oiled system. As an artist, you were probably not, the king supported your artistic practice. He provided studios for artists. He provided housing and everything. And so you were not living like me from paycheck to paycheck. But with colonialism, the king was ousted from Benin Kingdom. So I was interested in what happened to these artists whose lifestyles were so dependent on the king. Did they continue making work after he left? He was no longer in Benin Kingdom. And so we have this 17-year period, particularly in art historical archives, where there is no photographic or visual documentation of what was made during that period, so between 1897 and 1914. And so to sort of answer that question or call attention to that period, because I know the works that I'm making don't necessarily represent what artists would have made at the time, right? It's not, it's really much based on data. What I did was collect a data set of images that exist online right now from various museums who own the objects, and I trained a StyleGAN model, which is a machine learning model, to generate images that very much, it's speculative work, but I think it's important, especially in art history, if you're an art historian and you're thinking about that 17-year period, how do we visualize works that could have been, right? That's the question I'm thinking of.
Yeah, so it's a way to fill in that gap in the record in a way, or at least imagine what could have existed in this space. Another thing I keep thinking of with AI is this, we think of ChatGPT and there's some major models that we all know, like Midjourney is another famous one, but you can have these smaller custom trained systems that are more specialized tools, let's say. And I'm curious, what more specialized applications or models or tools have you used like this one?
Well, the StyleGAN, I've used a text to 3D, which is still in beta version, but it's great as well if you're interested in generating three-dimensional works. Yeah, just those two, I think.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can move on to Simon's presentation, and I think we have another bit of multimedia here that you could introduce.
So yes, I spent these past 2 years to shoot and edit my first feature film in France called Drone, I don't know if I pronounce it well, but when I say drone, I put my hand like that, drone, like the machine, to understand the title. And so that's basically the story of that main character, which is Emily, which is observed by a drone. And the full movies is she's getting obsessed, trying to understand who is behind that drone, who is looking at her, and yes, we can play.
Let's see.
Just to explain.
Yeah. So, well, you were telling me this is not made with AI. Just to be clear,
that's a real character. That's
yes,
a real human. Yeah.
Real human, real drone with some effects. But you were telling me that this film took you 7 years to write, and so in the aftermath of this film, and as you were doing your other work, you started using generative AI tools to help you write. And I'm curious, like 7 years is a long time. That's
I'm a bit ashamed. It's a bit too long, 7 years. But I mean, it's quite normal in France to produce his first.
But what made you want to shortcut it a bit and jump into like a generative tool to help you write?
Yeah, I can't spend 7 more years to do my next feature film. So, yeah, 2 years ago, the Villa Albertine suggested me to do the residency, and they asked Simon, "Do you have an idea?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to write my next movie with a machine to be faster." And so that was the only sentence I said, and then they bring me to California for 2 months. And honestly, it was amazing because I met many scientists, engineers, specialists on the AI question. When I left, I remember I was a bit like idealizing the artificial intelligence, all these models. For me, it was a bit like God, you know, and I was a bit afraid in the same time. And I remember, like, when I came back, I was like, okay, it's just a simple tool. It's actually quite simple. I felt to understand how it worked, and I had the feeling to be able to mastering the model, you know, and to do. So right now, it's not it's not a god anymore. Yeah, thanks to the Villa Albertine.
Yeah, you got to know it. You came to understand it as a tool. Does it make writing easier? I feel like the promise of generative AI is that it gives you a shortcut. It can write your report for you. It can summarize something for you. But does it truly make writing easier?
No. I think you have to be good. You have to know how to read, how to write. You have and even like prompting is not enough. You know, when you try to write with a machine, because you need to understand that you have to fine tune the model to train it. So I'm always like trying to find new novel, new script, new extract from my text, and I'm mixing all these text, and it gives me like new. It never gave me an idea. Actually, it's not new idea, but the fact to read this regeneration, it's like in Stanford they said me that it's like it will pushing you to write. So it pushes you to write, and really it's the model is always moving forward. You know, it's always generating. They say it's like a regurgitation of words. You know, and just by reading these regurgitations, it's giving you ideas, and sometimes it's like bad ideas, and I like when it's bad because it's like you need to fight against your co-author somehow and say, okay, I have a better idea. So now it's like it's a very important tool, and I can't imagine to work without it. No. Yeah.
So in that way, it's not giving you the idea for your script. It's not giving you the idea for a scene, but it's pushing you to keep writing and keep thinking and speeding up your process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm using a tool called Genario, and it's really like, I'm not, at that time I was using GTP3, the Plague One of GTP3, and now I use that software Genario. It's a bit like pseudo-write, you know, the American model. And it's really nice because it's really structured. It's made for script writers. And even for someone beginning, you can start with that. Like it asks you, it's a TV show, if it's a feature film, the duration, the genre. And at the beginning, there is always a part where you're just brainstorming with the machine. So it's like a discussion, and you're talking with the machine. And when you are ready, you generate the first like pitch, which is like 10 lines. And then when you are happy with it, you can generate the treatment and then the full script.
I was wondering, what scale do you work at? Like, do you start with short chunks of generated text and then gradually get longer and longer? Yeah,
actually, I'm always working like I have my script on one side, and I'm taking some part, putting in the machine, generating this part, and when it's good. And I never really use the generations. I'm just using my brain, actually, and what's happened to my brain while reading these generations. And so at the end, I'm always like, reformulating my ideas with the idea of the machine. I don't know if it's
right. So again, it's not that the model does your work for you. It's not that it instantly creates the final product, but instead it becomes this artistic process of generating text, reading it, seeing what it says, then editing it, changing it, rearranging it, and prompting more, and spitting out more text. And so it's not this instantaneous thing. It's a lot of hard work and your own thoughts going into this.
Exactly. Really, I guess that you have, good writer will be better, and bad one will be even lower. Sorry to say that, but there is something like that. Like, you have to know how, there is many good ideas, and sometimes it's giving good ideas, but for me, my work is to know what's the best one, you know. And for me, it's the most difficult process to pick the best ideas, and then to develop it, and then to spend 7 years to say, okay, I won't let that idea, I won't change, you know, because every morning you want to change. It's not a drone, but I know a scooter.
Yeah, you have to commit to an idea regardless. And I know with Genario, it has this feature where you can change the temperature of the output. And I hoped you could explain what temperature means in this context.
Alors, there is not you can't send the temperature in Generario. Generario is, I mean, at some point the creator told me that they will put this setting, but I remember in OpenAI like 2 years ago, the playground, there were just one setting, the temperature, and to understand that setting, you just need to understand what is AI, which is hard to define, but for me it's like, regurgitation of words, it's like statistics somehow, mathematics, like prediction, it's like my brain, it's predict the word after. It's like after one letter, it will be that letter, after that word, it will be that word, after that paragraph, it should be that paragraph, and that you can play on the degree of prediction. So at 0, it's the more predictable model. Like, for instance, I can say to shoot a movie, I first need to write and at 0, it would say a script. Yeah. It's absolutely obvious. And if you raise the temperature, and I love raising the temperature at the maximum is 1, it's the highest degree of
unpredictability. Like by changing the temperature, you're telling the AI in a way to be more dramatic, to be more extreme, to be more out of bounds.
Actually, to me, more weird. If for that sentence, if I put to shoot a film, I first need to write a will. It will say something like, it will work, but it will be slightly a bit weird, a bit different. And if, for instance, we put the scene we are living together here in the Villa Albertine, we came by the 5th Avenue. When you will go back, we'll be in the ocean, or I don't know. It's a bit like way more surrealist, and I was obsessed with that setting, and I was always raising the temperature at maximum after that.
So when you use the AI in a way, you want the least normal output. You don't want just the average. You don't want the most predictable. It can instead help you come up with the strangest thing or the...
Of course. I mean, I need, when you are writing, you are always like in your pattern, and so you are always looking, even it's like my co-author, you are always looking for someone which is really different from you. So I love when it's getting you somewhere else.
Yeah, and just to wrap this up once more, there is this problem of archetypes and patterns in training data, whether you're working with image generation or text generation. When you encounter cliches or tropes, or get something that's just out of the bounds of what you might use, how do you adapt to that? Like, do you embrace the cliche? Do you go the opposite direction?
Okay, let's be 2 years ago, GTP3, it was not, there was no moderation. So you have to understand that to train the model, it was all the free web, like Wikipedia, but even forums like Reddit or Discord, I don't know, full of very dysfunctional discussions. And I love that, because when you were generating, it was sometimes sampling these quite dysfunctional ideas, let's say. At that time, you had a disclaimer saying, okay, there is something which is inappropriate in some words. But for me, yes, as I told just before, the fiction is conflict. So that was full of conflict somehow. And today, the new version of GTP4 is way more, let's say, safe, which is good, but way less interesting for me as a writer, since it's very consensual and very, maybe too safe for fiction.
Yeah, we do face this balance of AI can be used in commercial contexts, but that means it needs to be extremely safe. It needs to work for everyone. But in an artistic context, you kind of want to stretch things. You want to find the unique or the weird.
Actually, in Generario, it's mixing models. So it's using Gemini, Anthropics, OpenAI, and even Mistral. So that's why it's a bit more free, I guess. And oui, la liberté. Oui.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear about all your experiments for both of you, and it gives me some hope that this is just a new field of creativity, and we're going to see a lot of new cool stuff in the future. But thank you both for discussing it.
Thank you very much, Minne, Simon, and Kyle. I now leave the floor to Chad Nelson, OpenAI's creative specialist, who will introduce him keynote on where AI is going. Chad.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here in New York. I'm from San Francisco. I work at OpenAI. so please don't fire any arrows at me. I'm a creative. I've been an artist for my entire career. And it's actually been an amazing journey to be part of OpenAI now is on the inside. My role, let's see here if we can go through this presentation. Let's see here. Let's just go, here we are. There's me. So my title is a creative specialist, which is interesting. What does that really mean? Well, as a creative, I work a lot with the researchers to basically say, are we building tools that are actually powerful for the creative, people in this room and around the world? And then I also go spend a lot of my time going out in the world and talking to people like yourselves to say, okay, what is it that you want to do with our tools? How are you using them? And bringing that knowledge back to the research team. So it basically becomes a feedback loop. So when I joined OpenAI, I've had an experience with them for about 2 years now. I'm going to kind of walk you through it from the past to the present to where we're going in the future. But it began for me when, let's see here, when DALL-E 2 came out. And DALL-E 2 preceded ChatGPT by several months, and it was the first text-to-image generator that was announced. And when it was launched in April of 2022, it was still closed to a very limited group of people. And I wrote OpenAI asking, I thought it would be fascinating. I'd seen some of the demonstrations that they'd shown of the avocado meeting an armchair or a squirrel riding a skateboard through Central Park. But I was very curious if this tool could actually convey human emotion, or at least convey something that I would emotionally respond to. And so they actually, luckily, gave me access to the tool. And one of the things they said is, well, don't do humans, because we're still doing our bias training, and we're concerned about deepfakes, so anything but humans. So I have a bit of an animation background, so I typed in my first prompt: a red furry monster looks in wonder at a burning candle. It's kind of a classic Disney, DreamWorks, Pixar challenge, if you will. And what came back was this. And I look at that and I say, it's pretty simple in terms of a monster, but it definitely got wonder. And if this is the very first thing that I've actually created, and this is kind of, if you will, for me, day zero, this is the worst it will ever be, I'm like, that's an incredible place to start. So then I typed in my next prompt. Oops, let me go here. A little bit of delay here. There. So my next prompt, of course, as an art major, I was starting to question all my life choices. And it brought up all these lovely little characters. And it made me think, okay, this is fascinating. All right, I've just done 2 things, and now I'm looking at this little world, if you will, of all these little cartoon characters. So then I just started creating. And then about 8 hours later, I had this montage or this collage of all these different creatures. And so I sent this to OpenAI and said, hey, this is the most fascinating thing I've ever used in terms of, since I literally first opened Photoshop in the 90s. I've never used a tool so powerful that let me create at such an unprecedented level in that short amount of time. And they wrote me back with saying, well, how much of that is actually Photoshop? And actually, I'm like, well, look, it's all DALL-E. You can check my logs. And so then they called me in and said, we want to meet you because we didn't really know it could do that yet. So that began my journey with OpenAI. In September of that year, I basically said to Open, I think we can make a movie with DALL-E. And so we made this movie called Critters. And basically the story, really in a nutshell, was a David Attenborough Planet Earth kind of documentary film collides with a Monty Python sketch. And I'll show you some examples of it. We're not going to watch it here. You can go find it on YouTube if you literally just type, or the URL there, critters.tv. But basically, all these characters we made in DALL-E, and then we brought them into After Effects and used traditional tools to do the animation, and then we hooked the faces up to Unreal Engine, and actually I performed the characters for all these, the acting, if you will. And so we've been in about 14 film festivals. It's won some awards. It's been really fun. And I was actually really thrilled because we premiered it at the Annecy Festival of Animation in Annecy, France. And I thought for sure it was going to be ridiculed or attacked as something destroying animation. We filled the theater, and actually it was amazing to see the applause and then the reaction. And because ultimately what we showed was this is a tool, and it's allowing us to explore creativity in a way that we had never been able to before. So later that year, OpenAI came to me and said, Vogue has called, and they want to do the first AI cover and a photo spread with Bella Hadid. And so the concept was, we shot Bella in New York here with the French photographer Caroline Jacobs. And we shot it in an empty studio, so basically just a giant white room. And then the creative direction was to create all the backgrounds and the settings and to extend the fashion using DALL-E 2. And so you can see some examples here of like one of the pieces. And that was interesting, I would get this, so basically, like this photo was just her on a white room. There wasn't even a pillow or a bed or anything. It was just her in this, empty, abstract space. And they would give me some very loose direction. Bella's on a bed, it's like a motel room, etc. So we started generating just the environment and all the backgrounds and all the elements and trying to match the lighting, and DALL-E 2 did an amazing job at that. But what was interesting about this process were the little details. And so, for example, let's see if it plays here. So that lamp in the back table there, we went through hundreds of lamps in trying to find the perfect lamp. First, I actually built a telephone. Let's just see if we can skip here. I don't know why it's not skipping. But anyways, we had a telephone originally. The creative director of Vogue thought it was just too typical, too expected. So we just kept going through and creating image after image. Let's see if it's for some reason it just keeps pausing here. But you can see we generated a lot, lava lamps and so forth. But eventually, we got to the final image, and all right, there we go. Really delayed. All right, oh, wow. Okay, so there you can see. After literally looking at hundreds of lamps and so forth, we got to the one. And what's interesting about this is, having done photo shoots prior, if I think about how would I have been able to achieve that, I'd have to go to antique shops and scour, if you will, to find that perfect lamp. And in a way, that lamp never existed. I mean, essentially, DALL-E made it up, and we were prompting with all sorts of crazy kind of descriptions to get some of that, to get ultimately what was that final image.
How long did it take you to get that variety of lamps?
I had probably about 4 hours. But we had 2 weeks to do the whole project. And when it started, it was just the cover. And then when we delivered the cover, they said, great, let's do an 18-page spread. But we don't want to increase the time. You still have only 2 weeks. So it was kind of nuts.
Each of the result comes in like 4 hours or 3 hours.
Well, no. Actually, the results come in seconds. But we just kept searching and searching and searching until we got to the one we liked. Here's another example. If it comes up. It's really delayed sometimes. Sorry. There he goes. So it's like the transatlantic signal from the 60s. It comes through every once in a while. So in this case, the only thing that was real was Bella in the little striped outfit, and then the whole minstrels and all the characters and that Teletubbies world in the background. That was all generated by DALL-E. And so what was interesting about this process, what I find is that the experience that I had was unlike anything I've done before. And, all right, let's see. There we go. We've seen this creative process now pretty much for centuries or decades, where we have the light bulb goes off in your head and you start sketching and you ideate, you might journal and so forth. And eventually you get to the point where you know what it is you want to build, and you leave from the ideation phase and you go into execution phase. And in most of the tools that I've worked with my entire career are software that focus on how to execute faster and more efficiently. But what I found interesting was these AI tools were actually letting me ideate in execution grade artwork or in visual quality. And I had never achieved that in my entire career prior. And so it changed my whole perspective about how I thought about my own creative process. All right, so let's talk about where we are today. So how many of you have actually used ChatGPT at some point? At this point, it's almost everyone in the room I see. How many of you have actually used DALL-E, though? So it's a fair number, which now they're both integrated. So what was cool is when ChatGPT has just a text large language model, you could communicate with it, you could chat with it, and so forth. When it was combined with DALL-E, suddenly it became something different. It became much more of a collaborator. And I'm going to walk through a couple of examples here. So you can see I do a lot with animation. This was a character that I was pitching, a little raccoon golfing raccoon. And so I asked ChatGPT to describe the picture, and it gave me a very clinical description. It's very factual, but I'm not going to read it here, but if you take a look, you can kind of see it's basically describing it, almost like a court reporter. But what's interesting is if I said, well, okay, well, ChatGPT, tell me less about what this picture is, and tell me who he is, and what's his backstory. And if it plays, there he goes. It would start giving me all sorts of log lines, if you will, for who is this character. And so I like this one, this little Percy Tailwind character. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. Well, let's dive into that a little deeper. And because it's ChatGPT now integrated with DALL-E, I could say, well, let's see where does Percy live? Show me his house. And it basically could start to visualize it. And now I looked at that and I said, well, that doesn't really look like a raccoon's house. It's too English country, too much of a cottage. Make it more of a wooden caddy shack. And so it gave me this. Now what's interesting is you can see from where you are, it actually automatically put a little sign on it that says Percy, because it knew who I was talking about. It knew who this character was that I was basically creating with it. And then I said, okay, well, that's interesting. Oh, what's the inside look like? And then I was like, okay, but in the story, he talks about this owner, or ChatGPT is mentioning this owner that taught him how to play golf and so forth, and they became inseparable friends. So, well, right, well, let's find out who that owner is. And it gave me lots of different stories, but I like this one, Chester Greenleaf. And it reminds me of kind of what we just heard earlier, which is like, it gives ideas. It's not choosing which one I take. That's for me. I'm curating. But it can give me 100 ideas or 10 ideas, and ultimately it's up to me to say, well, this one actually is pretty good. There's some gold in this one. So anyways, here we have Chester Greenleaf. And so I asked, what does Chester look like? Of course, he's a bear, a golfing bear. And then I said, well, there must be a golf pro at this course, and it must be a hedgehog, naturally. So what does that look like? And so you can see I'm basically interacting with this now piece of software, this AI system, but we're collaborating together to create ultimately what will be a pitch. What's interesting is when you pitch animation or anything in the kids' world, you always have to have toys. So then I just say, well, what does Percy look like as a little felt plushie? And because it already knows who I'm talking about, it already knows what he looks like, I don't have to re-describe it. I don't have to tell it what its outfit and the hat and all of that. It just knows, and it knows what felt plushies typically look like. So in a way, again, it's not like I have to teach it these things. It already understands what I'm talking about. I asked for a children's book. And what I thought was interesting, again, as just a little thing, which was this notice that said, the story of Chester and Percy, and then it just subtitled it, Fairway Friends. It just knew what I was talking about. It knew that they were friends. I said, let's go further and build a game or board game. You can see here, it's already illustrating that for me. So again, this is tools. You can all use this today. It's out right now. It's basically ChatGPT 4, and you can just talk to it. You can insert images in, what we call vision, and you can basically create whatever world is in your head with it and start to visualize it. What's also interesting, we've basically taken ChatGPT and we've turned it into what we call GPTs. Not the best name, but it's what they're called, which is basically the idea that you can take a GPT and make it an expert at something. Where's my water? I need a little water real quick. Here. So what's interesting about this is you can build a GPT for just yourself. You could build it for all your staff, your team, or you can distribute it to the world through our GPT store. And so, for example, if you go to the store right now, you'll see there's all sorts of different art tools and visual tools and writing tools and productivity tools. But for example, I know a couple of these here, but like you can cartoonize yourself, this consistent character. I think everyone has big complaint about AI systems. It's how do you make a character consistent from one image to the next? Well, one of our guys that I know is pretty well, he's like, well, I'm gonna make that a GPT and solve that problem. So you can basically go in his GPT, which anyone can use, you can describe who your character is, and then it'll just start generating consistent results for you. So, that's GPTs, but let's talk about then what's next. So you probably have heard about this thing called Sora that we announced about 2 months ago. It is a generative model, or a new modality, that's built up for video. And when I say it's not a product at this point, it's just an announcement of research. And that is because we're not releasing it yet. There's only a few people that are testing it. But what it can do is essentially build video, just like we can build images, at incredible quality. And in terms of the visual or aesthetic diversity, it's pretty staggering. So I'll show you a couple examples. Most of this is public. If you go to our site, if you check out our Instagram handle, you'll see a lot of this, but I'll show you a couple things that are kind of fun. So this is another character I made back in April of 2022 in DALL-E 2, and I loved its hip chonk and the sass and the attitude and the fur. I brought this character into Sora, And what it did is then brought it to life. And what's fascinating is the physics of the hair, but also notice that the disco ball now has reflections. I didn't have to tell it that. It knew there was a disco ball there. It knows how mirrors work. It knows how reflections work, and will automatically animate that for me based, again, on its intelligence about the world. Another example here. So it can read text, or you can input text to create video, but it can also do image to video. All right. Skip. I should just say next slide, man. Okay, here we go. All right, so this image is from DALL-E 3 at the top, this little potato kingdom. And I asked in the lower two images to say, make this image, but make them celebrating. And you can see now, these are two different versions of the same prompt. One has it rotating, the little spuds rotating around. The other has them jumping in the crown, and the building's animated. But again, I could have asked for dozens of these just to say, okay, keep giving me additional ones until I found the one I liked, or I could keep redirecting it to better direct what I am actually hoping out of this, quote, celebratory performance. Another example, I'm not sure what side it's playing. Let's see here. Oop. All right, so complex motion, the ability, and now if I told you this was a GoPro shot of a cat going through a garden, you'd say, okay, that's a pretty impressive GoPro shot. Well, basically, that's what I asked for in the prompt. And the Sora was able to essentially just generate that with the collision, the physics, the lighting qualities, the fur, all of that. All these are online too. If you look online, you can see the prompts that I used to basically generate some of these. And then when you think, that's really interesting, it's a single object, but where it gets more impressive is when you have a lot of motion. Like say, for example, this Chinese New Year celebration with at least 200 to 300 people in the crowd. And most people, when they see this, they say, well, that's some iPhone footage, right? That's like, that can't be AI generated. Well, the truth is it is. And then people say, well, then how, like, who are these people? And the way these AI systems work is, it's not really thinking of any one person or any, like, a group of people. It has images, or like literally millions of images of people. And so when it says, I need 400, it's imagining from millions of images of people, 400. And that's kind of hard for us to understand, because we think, oh, I needed a couple of people. I would like pull from like memories of almost maybe specific people, or just pick, like they say, kit bashing. You'd pick a couple things from different people, and you'd make a newer image. But these systems are so complex, they could literally take and process millions and millions of images of people into a single instance. I'll show you one more here with Sora, and then we'll wrap up because I don't want to take too much time. So this was interesting. I asked for traveling down the busy streets of Dublin, Ireland, but all I did was change the decade. So here, let's see, so this was the 1800s, and notice how it changed the film stock, the fashion, the transportation methods. And what I think is funny here, let's see, I don't know why it's not playing all of them. Come on. All right, and the last one. All right, so now that it's playing all of them, I think it's kind of funny, though, that the older two at the top actually have drone footage, and then the new modern ones, or the more modern ones, are all, kind of planted on the ground. But what I think was, again, interesting is that Sora understood. When I said, oh, I want a film from the 1800s, it understood it's black and white, it's grainy, it has the shutter, or the stutter, it has film grain, it has all those qualities, and I don't have to basically teach it that. It already knows. All right, so lastly, here are my final thoughts. What does all this mean for all of us as artists or as creatives? Well, the way I think about it is, my entire career, I've been in the business of creativity. And in that business, I've always wished I had more time to come up with my ideas and explore all those, if you will, various risks or unexpected ideas. And if you think about it, it's like, okay, in a given week, I might be able to explore 5 ideas in depth, in my normal path, if you will. But what I find fascinating is now that I'm using AI, I'm basically 10xing, if not more so, each of those ideas, exploring them deeper, further, taking more risks, and thus, in a way, I'm not really getting more time, but I'm using my time more effectively. And I think that's what's really interesting for the art of creativity, or that process of creativity, is that if you can actually take the resources you have, the people on your team, and the time you have, and push it farther than the expected, or what's even comfortable for you, that means we're going to actually see better creativity. At least that's my hope. Thank you so much. Yeah, happy to.
Yeah, we can take a few questions from the audience if you have some. We have some microphones that we can share. Are there any questions someone wants to ask? Yes, 1, 2, here you go.
Very simple question, and thank you for the presentation, it was fascinating. When will this be available to the public, roughly?
Sora, that is?
Yeah.
I think we're still trying to answer that question internally, so we don't know yet, but as soon as we do, we can't wait to announce it. But ultimately, there's a numerous array of questions as you can relate to deepfakes, obviously all the safety protections. The last thing we want to see is violence, misinformation, obviously how many elections are happening this year. So there's massive issues with something that would be general purpose for the globe. That said, we're testing with local or trusted artists in the beginning, but ultimately the goal would be to, Open's goal is always to create AI to better humanity at large, so it's not just to create a professional tool for Hollywood.
Thanks.
That's a perfect segue for tomorrow and the panel of disinformation and propaganda. And there was another question right here.
I guess I have a very simple question, but I thought I should ask it since you're here. Do you have any prompting kind of like tips and tricks to tell those of us that are just kind of getting started in this realm?
Yeah, so I actually, this is one thing that's interesting. I've taught courses on this, and you might have heard the term, oh, you need to be a prompt engineer. I don't necessarily think so. I just think you need to understand how to speak to these systems in a very logical way. So the way I do it typically is I describe my subject first, and then maybe any other background details second. Then I'll put the things like time of day, or maybe the mood or the emotional quality of the image third, and then I'll always end with like how it's being captured. Is it on film? Is it painted? Is it where's the camera located if it is being filmed? So it's kind of just that 4-point structure, and I just use that always. Doesn't matter which tool. I use that in Midjourney, I use that in Photoshop, or now Adobe, and I use that, of course, in Open Tools as well.
I had a question.
Yes.
Oh, over here.
If you have a microphone, you're good to go.
So, very cool. So the Sora, what happens with bad actors? I mean, that crowd scene was so realistic. And I did notice a couple faces that were a bit off, but often people aren't looking at that with that detail to get a rise or a reaction. So what's happening in the community to address these issues?
All right, well, there's two parts, I guess, to that question. One is the quality. Obviously, if this is where we are with Sora right now, obviously that's the lowest quality it'll ever be, so you can only imagine it'll get better. As it relates to working actors, especially background actors, it's an interesting question because, bad actors specifically. Yeah, well, I can't speak for bad acting. However, I do know, we've been doing digital crowds and digital extras for now, gosh, over a decade and a half. What makes me the most excited about Sora is I feel that there are maybe 24 filmmakers on this planet that can make any film with any budget they pretty much ask for. And that's it. There's no one else that's going to get that freedom and that level of creative opportunity. And so to me, what's more exciting is, can we actually give the human species, if you will, the creative tools that will allow them to make a Christopher Nolan style film or another great epic filmmaker. And I think that's where it's going to be interesting to see if that playing field is not just basically about the money or $300 million budgets.
Over here.
Does the word copyright exist in any of this?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think there's going to be a whole talk on that tomorrow, actually, I believe. Yeah, so I'll save that one for that one. But yeah, copyrights. I'm actually going through the process of copyrighting my film Critters right now, but I also documented everything I did to make each of those characters, because it wasn't just a prompt and then I got an image and that was it. I did a lot of work in manipulation, if you will, or modification to make those characters look the way I wanted, and I documented it.
There will absolutely be a panel on that tomorrow with representative from the US Bureau of Copyright and the French AI Commission, so thank you for introducing that as well. A question over there.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you for presenting it. My question was around simulations that you could build, because Percy, it remembers, it knows its house, you could also start to have it engage with other characters and read those transcripts. And if you want, my question was, what APIs or what signals could you put around, ChatGPT, where over time, if things were changing in the real world, it would affect the characters as a form of data? Because right now, I'd have to describe those different personas, and then it would give me different simulations. But I was just curious, like, what signals do you think could dynamically change those simulations?
Yeah, I mean, if you basically hook up your characters in your world to real-time data, again, depending on what those inputs might be, you could all of a sudden have the system start to change stories, change the characters' journeys, maybe even come up with little quips and retorts, if you will, based on whatever the weather. What happens in the Olympics next month or in July this summer. So you could have it do those things, but you need to just create those inputs. But I think that's where it also gets very fascinating. Having, again, talked to now a number of animation companies and been in the world of animation, it's very expensive to do animation that's responding to pop culture or the zeitgeist of the now, whereas tools like this would allow, you could see a Minions world suddenly reacting to the news on a daily basis, which they just never could achieve right now based on current production means. Yeah, that's well, we can definitely talk about the API and how that's integrated, but that's a more technical discussion. But definitely reach out to me and we can put you in touch with that whole team that does all of that.
Maybe one last question and we'll move to the museum panel.
Perfect. Hi, Chad. It's very nice to meet you. My
Nice to
name's
meet you.
Maeve. Thank you so much for taking the time again. As you were talking about ideating all these lamps for that Vogue cover, it reminded me of this experiment that this professor had done where he split up students into two halves, photography students, and one half had multiple tries to take one image, and the other half only had one try. And when he asked students at the end, basically the students had one try to ideate, felt more satisfied with their product, and it kind of made me think about this idea of the paradox of choice, right? There's almost too much choice. Do you think that something like that, do you feel that in your creative process, I guess?
Well, it's one of the reasons why I never eat at the Cheesecake Factory, for example.
Yeah, same.
I hope none of you are there. But I just feel like there's a reason why I like going to some place that is curating the best of a certain type of thing. And because DALL-E is such a generalist, if you will, on so much knowledge, that it can get overwhelming. But I think this also goes back to education and having the knowledge to know what it is you're going to ask for. If I would have just asked for a lamp or even a red lamp, I would have gotten a lot of generic lamps. And if there's one thing these systems are, is they're just predicting what it is they think you want. They're not predicting the unexpected, although we did talk about temperature earlier. But most of them, you have to really know. In the 1960s, this one Italian glass designer was doing this type of work and was using ceramics in this way, and ask for that. Otherwise, it's just going to give you the expected. So to me, that goes back to just knowledge and education. It's key to be able to use these tools. Otherwise, you're just going to get everything that literally anyone else will be able to output. So to me, that's where it's like, again, knowledge is power, but also it's just the ability, to me, I don't know, again, I do find there's a point where you have to take it away. You have to create that sandbox. So I don't know, it could be time, could be money, could be a deadline, but I always live by at least some sort of box, if you will.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Chad. Thank you. We'll move on to our very last panel about museums. We are really happy to welcome on stage Jane Alexander from the Cleveland Museum of Art, Freya Salway from Google Arts and Culture, and Thomas Sagory from the French Museum of Archaeology for a panel which will be moderated by Zachary Small from the New York Times. Thank you.
So thank you for joining us this evening at, I think, the fanciest overflow room for the Met Gala. I'm sure Bella Hadid is somewhere in the crowd. We're just waiting for her to pop up. So tonight I'm going to introduce some of our panelists after that great introduction. We're going to get into things about the museum. I think the benefit for us is we're coming after so many great speakers who have touched on things that I think we'll be able to respond to a little bit and have more of a conversation, pulling the night together if we do our jobs correctly. If not, you can tell us later over the drinks. So all the way on the left, we have Jane Alexander, who is the Chief Digital Information Officer at the Cleveland Museum of Art, where she's responsible for creating and transforming digital projects with a visionary application of technology in support of the museum's mission. In 2021, Jane led the development of an innovative in-gallery experience called Revealing Krishna, Journey to Cambodia's Sacred Mountain, which provides visions of sort of immersive mixed realities to experience the stories of conservation for those works. In 2010, since 2010, Jane has also led many versions of Art Lens Gallery and used AI to inspire museum visitors to dive deeper into the museum's collection. Freya Salway is the head of lab at Google Arts and Culture. She has worked with so many artists, technologists, curators, scientists, kind of anyone cool in the industry. Freya's worked with them, including Rafik Anadol, who we saw in images in the keynote address, and who we might get to a little bit later. And then we have Thomas Sagory, the head of digital development at the National Museum of Archaeology in France. Thomas has been in charge of the ministry's archaeological reference collection since 2005. And since 2015, he's been responsible for developing digital policy at the museum. And we're going to get into all sorts of things about AI and I guess a little bit of restitution in archaeological objects, which I'm very excited about. And as I said before, my name is Zachary Small. I'm a reporter at the New York Times. I have a book coming out called Token Supremacy that is about the collisions between NFTs, digital art, museums, and money, all of my favorite things. So without further ado, I just wanted to say, talking about what museums mean with AI is so interesting because I don't think we often associate museums with technology, even though there is a long history. You can look at MoMA down the street, you can look at Guggenheim up the street. These are modern art museums that look like laboratories on purpose. And that's part of the history of those museums. So at MoMA in the 60s, they were doing shows about looking back at the age of mechanical reproduction, the machine age. They were showing works that artists collaborated with engineers from Bell Labs. And I think some of that history has been lost a little bit. And part of what's so interesting about that is it kind of overturns our image of museums as being these great stores of success in the art world and in culture, right? We go to see the heights of human worth. And today I wanted to start this panel just by talking a little bit about failure in technology and the role that failure plays and the ways that museums might be able to communicate that as we're facing new technology like NFTs and maybe like AI that comes out and we see it and we think it's perfect, but maybe there's actually more to that story. Maybe it's not perfect right out of the box as we so wish it was. So I was wondering, Jane, if you could start and talk a little bit about the role that failure plays in your work at the museum and creating new programs and tools using AI.
Sure. I do want to, if you don't know the Cleveland Museum of Art, I'm a native New Yorker, and I've actually been at the museum for 14 years. I thought I'd be there for 5 years. One of the benefits is iteration. I will say, and because it's been told to me and I've gotten to travel around the world, it is a great encyclopedic museum, but we are leading in innovation in the art museum world. And we have been since 2012 when we opened the original Gallery 1, which is now Art Lens Gallery. Through that, though, our goal has always been about giving people the tool sets to look closer, dive deeper. It's not tech for tech's sake. There's like lots of cool things that are coming out and people would have an idea, but really if it wasn't giving you an ability to look closer, get deeper, have a story, be brought in, because really our goal is to make art matter to all audiences. So we've been iterating that for years. So what's the failure of that is we very much also are evaluations, analytics, we do it all, and we print it all, and we share it all. But in 2017, we went to one iteration of Art Lens Gallery. We decided to remove all touchscreens, everything gesture-based, because we really were building for the digital native. And one of the things, using AI, we wanted to share emotion. You don't have to love art to have meaning in art, was sort of our goal. So we thought we're going to use this AI, and it will show you in 30 seconds different images, and by the way your face looks, if it's confused, distressed, or happy. And you know, it would mark that, and it would share your face with, like, on this big beacon, everyone who felt, you know, like confused by an artwork or whatever. But training, machine learning, this is 2017, was a lot harder than we thought. Now it's one of those projects that I wanted to sort of disable. People like it because at the end you get a gift of you looking at artworks and it's all goofy, and it's exactly what I just said, not tech, you know, tech for tech's sake.
And did you experiment with that?
Oh yeah.
So we looked at this a little bit ahead of this talk, and basically it matches your expression with an artwork in the collection. Yeah. What did it match your expression to, if you remember?
Oh no, it's the other way. You look at an artwork and we also have so we even did that earlier. So in 2012, our very first game was, if you make a face, it would match you with something in the collection. And Google, like 2.5, 3 years later, like they came and saw it, and then they made an app, and I remember the people who came, so started at Cleveland.
It was a very popular app.
But when it came out, everyone who worked on that project was like, did you see this app? But anyway, yeah, that's where we first started. That actually was super successful because, but what was uncomfortable, which was also brought up in the last talk, is biasness of our art collection. What we were collecting, what it was matching with, it got a little uncomfortable after it had been out for a while, you know, after people were more cognitive of what was going on.
And this leads to some of the core drawbacks of AI as it stands right now. You put bad data in, you're going to get bad results out. So if the data samples are biased towards one race or another, or a gender, what have you, you're going to get similarly biased results.
Right. So that was, I think, one of the one I was moving to is in 2017, we were like, oh, we're really going to use machine learning. We're taking it to a new thing. We really wanted to think about emotion. And we just didn't have enough. We kept bringing in people to train it. It just wasn't accurate. And like, I remember the developers like, but look at the eyebrows. Those eyebrows are angry. And I'm like, they're smiling. Like, you know, you can't really do it. So I don't think we've had a failure because we have such a process of iterating. You know, we sunset things. We don't just let things go. In fact, we're one of those spaces that we're like in the middle of revamping the whole thing, and we're still doing things that have never been done before because it's time to like take what we've learned and take it to a new level.
Great. And Freya, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the artist programs at Google and the ways that those programs work with new inventions happening at Google, the way that those might be iterated upon. Maybe, you know, some things are seen as a failure at first, and then you're surprised when there's new technology and you can update the tool.
Yeah, of course. We have an artist in residence program at our lab in Paris, and then we also have a number of other kind of more bespoke ways that we engage with a variety of artists from different fields. And I think in terms of like the nature of experimentation, you know, you were saying about failure, I think it depends how you define kind of failure as well. Because if you're really experimenting and pushing the possibilities, if you define failure as what you set out to do, you don't achieve, I don't think we've done any experiment with any of our collaborators, and what artists are brilliant at is pushing forward and like questioning. And so I think we've rarely had a straight line where we've ended up exactly where we started. And so adaptability has been like really key in terms of being able to realize some of the different experiments. A couple of kind of patterns of maybe it's more challenges that have arisen. So is around, you're talking about kind of data, is the unstructured data sets and how data sets are, how you then get them into a structured state. Museums have huge collections and are very interested. One of the big conversations right now is of teasing out kind of new connections and new ways of engaging with those collections. And the large language models have progressed hugely, but there's still real limitations. We're still constantly experimenting around, the hallucination and a lot of those issues. But
and let me ask you too, just like in terms of collections, for people that aren't so knowledgeable about what goes into a museum collection's data files. So you have the image, you have the title, you have the artist. What else might you?
But so then the metadata, so how it's labeled, and with kind of large historical, data sets, the labeling is a challenge. We did a project with the Smithsonian and their American Women's Initiative where they said one of their challenges was, although women have contributed significantly to science and the data exists, for many reasons it's quite difficult for their researchers and curators to surface. So we worked with them on a project where designing kind of using machine learning, designing tools to help them better surface women in their collection, and then through that we're able to make new connections and insights. But yeah, a lot of it comes down to how things are labeled and and just the different ways in which things are labeled.
Completely. And if you were to go to the Met Museum down the street when they're not having a giant festival, and you ask some curators about this, it's not only that, it's the curatorial files, physical records, sometimes spotty, that then you would need to also upload, and then you'd have to make sure that the machine recognized the actual text in what you're uploading, which is like kind of relatively new technology in a PDF.
Yeah, and there's huge. It's like advancing every day.
That's over a decade. Like one has been really thinking about how do you bring all the metadata forward. I mean, we have 38 fields of data per most objects that are available open to the public that include provenance and related items and biographies of the artist and all that stuff you were talking about. Digitization is sort of the soul of innovation for art museums.
Completely, and I think we're going to come back to that topic too, but I think, Thomas, you might have something to say about this in terms of the massive amounts of data that you're looking at.
Yes, of course. I completely agree with my colleagues here. At the French National Museum of Archaeology, we have about 3 million objects, and it's just even much more than this, because when you have one number at the museum, it's sometimes 1,000 objects, especially if you look at Paleolithic time. So the amount of data is just huge. So talking about failures, I totally agree. The quality of the data is just the key point of a museum if you want to be able to give access to this knowledge and then to be able to use it in such softwares and using it with AI. But we had a different approach, and we started to use AI on another level, on the research level at the museum. We have, from the beginning, and this is, just when you started the presentation, at the beginning of your question, you were talking about technology in a museum. And when I look at my, the description of my missions at the museum today, and when I look at the mission of Abel Maître, who was in charge of the modeling laboratory at the end of the 19th century. The museum was created in 1862. I'm just doing exactly the same thing. The aim is exactly the same. I'm just using the tool that I'm able to use. So I'm doing 3D modeling, where he was using standard modeling. There are some difference, of course, when an object is very fragile, or you can't put plaster on it, obviously. But the process is exactly the same. So using AI is a way to be more efficient. You know, when you have 3 million objects, and when you know that the data are not good, maybe AI is a solution. But you need to train it, you need to use it, and as we heard all along the presentation tonight, it's not just pressing buttons, it's just being able to find a goal, to work together with all different people in a museum to be able to find solutions. And especially on 3D modeling, we have challenges, you know, a shiny object, glasses are very complicated to digitize. But using AA, you can find solutions, so yes.
I think what you're getting to is something that I find a lot of in my reporting on AI and talking to artists or curators, museum workers. The best way that I've heard it is this optimization of the work that you're doing. Someone once communicated it to me saying, you know, there have been film editors for as long as there's been film. When it started, people were cutting together the film and putting the clips together. And then, through digitization, that job changed, right? You're using Adobe or any film editing software to put the clips together. It's not that the job of an editor disappeared completely. And I feel like maybe you feel the same. You know, you're not going to be outdated from AI, I don't think, but your job might change.
Yes, exactly, and it has already changed, in fact. But I think also maybe it's related to the science of archaeology. An archaeologist, you know, it is a science where to understand a site, a structure, or an object, you have to destroy part of it. You know, you have to put the object out of the earth, and this is an act that you can't undo. So the way you will register, the way you will document every aspect of your work on the site is an information about this object, the actions, the history, the men and women who did this. So this is very related to this. And I found it something also very interesting. Archaeologists are always looking at other sciences. In the 19th century, they were working with militaries when topography was started to be used by militaries. We learn how to draw maps from the militaries, and now any archaeologists are using this. When photography started, we started to use it because we needed to register the site. So AI is almost the same. It can help. So we try it, and then we see if it works.
Right. I think it comes back to that idea of museums being these laboratories, and another idea of artists sometimes acting as alarm bells for the technology we use, or even innovators thinking about the next version, the next generation of that technology. And I think one of the questions I have is, with those interactions with artists, thinking about what it means to innovate, what it means then to communicate with the public. And this is a question for you, Freya. When you're working with artists on these new technologies and on AI, what is that feedback system that you use? Do artists ever get frustrated with the technology? And how do you find a path forward?
Yes, of course. And I think it's... in terms of our limitations with the technology, sometimes we can think the technology can have the answers, but as you say, there's a lot of iteration that happens. And I think, I remember, this isn't AI actually, but there was an artist, back in 2016, I worked with a portrait artist called Jonathan Yeo, and he was working with tilt brush, which is where you painted in virtual reality. And he said to me, he said, this is cool, I like it, but I'm a bit frustrated by it, because he was like, I want to create something physical. So then we said, okay, so we looked at like 3D printing that. And then he said, well, I'm frustrated now because I've lost any sense of kind of the brush stroke. And so then we worked at like looking at traditional kind of sculpting methods to then cast it in bronze. And his frustrations pushed what was technically possible at that time. And I think that's what I find often, is that things take, where there are frustrations, a lot of artists push you to kind of find answers, and if you can't find them, take you in different directions.
That's one of the amazing and frustrating things about artists. They're going to make you work for it.
Yeah.
Got it. And I think this question also gets into the accessibility and what AI means in the museum space. You know, and maybe this is a question for you, Jane, working in museums, is do you ever get worried that audiences might come away thinking, wow, that was a really great tech demo using art? Do you worry about how that might change their view of the artwork, and what are the ways that you make sure that you're putting art forward?
I don't worry because we really do go through a process of, we don't pick the technology and then come up with the idea. We solve a problem and we see which, you know, like 5 years ago, people were like, would you use VR? Would you? I was like, I don't know, maybe we would, you know, and we regarding accessibility, during the pandemic, we really had this moment where we were working on this big exhibition, the Revealing Krishna, and we came home and I said, you know what? That's off for a year. We pivoted and we spent our time using AI to make tool sets. And so we did things with Milvis and said, like, so nobody was in their classroom anymore. No college kids were going back. So we said, it was called Share Your View. And it's up now and people use it all the time. You take a picture and it matched you with the artwork. But the artwork always takes you back to the like art detail page that has the videos, all the metadata. If it's open access, you can download it. If we made a photogrammetry and it's in 3D, you can download that. So we've wanted to take it, and right now we actually, using DALL-E and OpenAI, we've been creating this project where it's called Extend the Art, where you take an artwork from the open access collection and you're learning how to do, someone said, how do I learn how to do those prompts? I was like, oh, use Extend the Art, you know, because you start to learn what comes back and how it comes back. But we really focus on accessibility in that we want to be anyone who's sight impaired or blind be able to have the description. There's the curatorial interpretation of the artwork, but then there's actually someone describing the artwork. And to do that would take, we would all be long gone before we would get, definitely before you get through your collection. And so we've been really working with AI on multiple things, on using multiple platforms, using multiple ways, testing different ways of doing it. And that's really been something we've now teamed up with other museums, because the more we can get that together, by sharing a data set, by sharing our open APIs together, by having a standardization, by having what does a descriptive text look like, to really be able to share that within any museum. And that's what we're focused on.
Right, and I think that brings us to one of our last topics, which is the future of AI in museums, right? Where are we going with this stuff? Something that I've been thinking about quite a lot comes from this research paper looking into a bias that comes with the proliferation of AI images, of deep fakes, of not necessarily knowing if it's real or not, as we just saw recently in the Sora videos, right? What does that mean? Well, some researchers believe that it creates a bias in our minds, which is to say, even if we see a true image, we might assume it's fake because we think there's so many deep fakes out there that maybe everything's fake. And it leads us down, I think, probably a scary path, but one that maybe museums are uniquely poised to answer with their stockpile of images and a study of what visual culture means. Is this a question on any of your minds? And I'm wondering too, what other applications of AI might be used in the future of your work in terms of, you know, helping the public understand the society we're living in today? Big question.
I find the question always interesting to ask, is it a real picture? And speaking about real, we can also ask, is this true? And, you know, history, modern history has many examples of real pictures being used a bad way. So I think it's always interesting in terms of approach to ask this question. As as we are, from my perspective at the French National Museum of Archaeology, we are being very pragmatic on the project. So we have many pictures. I don't know if there is an example. We are working on an anastylosis, digital anastylosis of the ceiling of a walk shelter of the Paleolithic time. We have about 1,000 parts of the ceiling which are engraved and sculpted with ibex, woman, bison, bear, many representations, and we're working on the restitution of this. And so about the image, studying such sites is also thinking about representation, about finding any ways to be able to feel and share all the knowledge around them. So if asking a picture and asking us if it's true or not, it's start of the process of a museum of education, of just exchanging about it. And there is another aspect where pictures are very interesting, is on illicit traffic. And we are using AI in a European project like this, and we need real and true images, and we'll have to be very careful not to have, fake images inside the system.
So this is for customs officials.
Exactly.
Who, if they're looking at a possible antiquity that's been looted, they'd be able to sort of research it quickly and arrest someone.
Exactly. And it's a project that mixes museum, custom borders police, and in this application we need real and verified pictures.
It's fascinating.
And I think, we technology companies should be working with museums and can learn a lot from museums and the expertise there in terms of kind of critical analysis of images. And I think recently was it the European Museums kind of network, they were issuing some guidance around the role and the trusted role that kind of museums can play. And also I think as well as that kind of differentiating kind of, real from fake. I also think museums, this is just me personally, I find can be places of like nuanced reflection as well and engagement with that kind of discourse. You get a lot of, you read a lot of kind of polarized views, and I think, there's many curators and museums that are offering that space as well, which I think is really important.
I think when you actually look at surveys of most trusted institutions, museums are still at the top, at least in the US, above the government and media.
I would say one thing we're saying is a fake image and a real image, they're all images, and it's like the museum, and this even goes back to when we really pushed, Smithsonian did their open access based on Cleveland Museum of Art's approach, because people were really scared if you give the objects in the public domain to the public, what will they do to them, And it's all about, and the different derivatives and all the things that we even do, but it always, we are constantly digitizing the collection in new ways, and we house it for the public. And so it's about sort of the credit or the copy, in the metadata in the actual image, that's where it is. But anything that's not who is the official source, it's the object. But images, we have multiple images over 20 years that don't even look alike of the same object because technology has changed. It doesn't even look like the same color,
Right, of course. And if you're looking at paintings from the 1600s that have been conserved over years, each conservator might kind of change the color of that work in terms of their chemical process. So you're right. As we think about images, I think the stability of what is a true image versus fake gets shaky.
Yeah, it's about where was it created? Where's the source of it? And I think that's true without AI, in a sense.
I think it's a troubling cliffhanger. But I think with that, we're going to open it up to questions for a little bit. Yeah?
Hi. My question is for Freya. I'm myself a computer engineer, but I've been doing a lot of work with Google Books for the last 5 years or so, doing research related to colonialism and a variety of subjects, racism, and Google Books is rather quirky, but related to the whole concept of bias. I just yesterday did a search with a query of Christopher Columbus and slavery in American history books. So, and I came up with like an amazing surprise that a history book from the 1930s mentioned that Columbus took in slaves and brought them back to Spain and wondered and asked the students, how could, this great man do such a thing, and then went through a number of pages about it. A 1915 history book made no mention of Columbus bringing back slaves and basically said he was so good to the people and gave them cakes and things, the native people that he met. And so I'm wondering, is Google working on making a AI interface to Google Books in that it, just using regular intelligence, it's so easy to find these sorts of biases. And, because I just looked for Columbus and slaves, if you will. But artificial intelligence could make this so much easier. And perhaps, in your concerns, in AI about addressing bias, just doing that. I mean, it seems that a tremendous amount could be accomplished by looking at such a large database and saying, how do you avoid the bias? And, what queries can you do to discover bias? And I'm wondering, are you working on that?
And so I personally work on a lab that is focused on, I work with researchers on the emerging technologies and then how they apply with kind of our cultural partners and artists. So I'm afraid I don't have a definitive answer on that. I don't know in terms of, but what I can say is that there are teams at Google in terms of responsible AI researchers looking at biases and working with many people externally and internally about possibilities and addressing those.
How AI is trained.
And how AI is trained and
Thank you. Is there another question?
Little question from over outside.
Yes.
You mentioned this idea of truth and trust in museums. Is it trustworthy? Are museums more trustworthy because they hold the physical object of art? And what's this relationship between, fake or real or truth or trust when it comes to art in general? Because is it ultimately just a question of how much time, the object has been preserved and come to us, and that's why it has more value than, say, an AI-generated image?
I'll let my museum colleagues answer that in a moment, but I did just want to say too, right, this question of trust is a subjective one, right? So just to make that clear, right, if we're talking about what is trustworthy, that's a value judgment.
Yeah, and now I lost my, I was going to say that, our museum is a free museum, and our responsibility as caretakers of the collection we have. It's really the public's, be it digitally or physically. So when we say, the actual objects in our collections, the ones that are the most valuable based on whatever, and the ones that maybe aren't as valuable based on whatever, it doesn't matter. We hold them to the public in the same way. We conserve them in the same way. I think we were saying, when we were talking about how will we know this image is real? And my feeling is all images are real, and it's going to be who took this image and is this image created, and it just being captured, it being credited that way, and it's going to be about standards and what are the rules, kind of, and how can technology do it automatically, like your camera automatically tells you what time you took it and blah, blah, blah. And so that's kind of, I think, what we're talking about, the trust of the image.
Yes, I would suggest to make archaeological research on the image. You know, you could make excavations on it to see what the layers, where it's coming from, and what happened to her. Yes, one thing about the object, I would say, is all the knowledge around it, and that's part of researchers and museum to be able to gather all these things around the object, and that's how you can be able to have your own idea about how worthy and good it is. And of course, we have also other examples in museum, fake objects. You have very interesting exhibition about fake objects. But if you are talking about knowledge, sometimes you don't need the real object to have a very interesting talk about stuff. So, yes, sorry.
Thank you very much.
It's a large subject, yes.
Thank you. I think this closes the panel. We can hear some demonstrations outside of people wanting to get in, but we were full already. Thank you very much. This was great. We're going to break for cocktails. A warm thank you to all experts and moderators today. Thanks again to all people making this possible.